This is a production of Only Hope Publications and is a work of the Churches of Christ.
Hello and welcome to another presentation of Only Hope Publications. I'm honored today to be with Matthew Waters as we look at transitioning from being unfaithful to living the faithful Christian life. Matthew, doing all right today, man?
Doing well.
That's good, man. We're actually at a preacher's camp this week, and I'm thankful to be able to sit down with Matthew and talk with him a little bit about making a transition in life where one is living unfaithfully to the Lord, but making that decision to pick back up and to be devoted to Christ. Matthew right now is actually at the East Tennessee School of Preaching, and I've had a great opportunity this week to get to know him better. And I've already known him somewhat for a while, I guess, about a year now.
About a year.
And it's been good getting to know him. And I'm really looking forward to this interview because there are a lot of folks out there that are baptized into Christ. They become members of the Lord's church. They become children of God. But yet they become unfaithful, and sometimes become unfaithful for a while, live a lifestyle of unfaithfulness, and sometimes struggle with how to get back on track. And I'm just so thankful that Matthew is willing to sit down and have this discussion. So tell us a little bit about just how you first became a Christian, how your childhood was being raised, and understanding the Lord's church.
Okay. My mother was a member of the church. My dad, he knew about it and he would attend from time to time, but he never really was a faithful member. So my mother, and I have an older brother, and she would have us go to church every week, and we had family members, uncles that were members and actually did stuff with the congregation. So we would see some of that. And when I turned about 12 or 13, I decided that I wanted to be baptized. And it was recently, my brother had been baptized maybe about 6 to 7 months before. So I don't know if it was just because I saw that and I wanted to follow that, or if I actually knew, and that's something that kind of led to my just falling away is that I didn't really make my faith in God, my knowledge of it, my own. I feel like I might have been following on someone's coattails and making their faith mine.
What's the age difference between you and Andy?
My brother is
Andy is his brother.
My brother is 4 years older than I am.
4 years older. Okay, so he was baptized about 17. I guess.
Yeah, 15 or 16. That's the thing. I don't really remember.
Something long. Okay.
And usually when you're baptized, it makes a big effect on your life. And when I talk to instructors and other people at the school, they can tell me what year, what day.
Right.
You know, if it was a Sunday, or if it was a Monday night, and they called the preacher from home, and that's the thing. With me, it was never that. So I really started to think, did I really know what I was doing and do it for the right reasons? And with that, not having that strong basis, and like I said, my father didn't really attend all the time.
Now, were you all attending? Were you and your mother and your brother attending?
We would attend regularly, every service, and it got to the point to where with that we saw what my dad would do, and even now looking back, you look at what my mother would do and trying to hold the family together, and you see like the influence that you have when you get back to the home with my dad and my mom, with them being married, even the influence of the world that he had, it kind of merged into hers. And when you look at that, you're like, she was doing her best, but was she really living the Christian life as well as she is now? And she wasn't. And even with that, you start to see that. And I feel like that's what happened. It started first with my brother, the world that we saw with my dad, and allowing certain things with my mom too. It kind of creeped in with my brother. And then when his friends and all that turned into that way, I just followed right along with that then too. It's almost like just following him with what he did. And
do you remember seeing inconsistencies? I mean, do you remember at all thinking, well, here we're going, and dad or mom or,
I did with dad. Looking back now, the more I learned, the more I start to realize things, and you start to think, well, my parents did this, or we would do these certain things instead of going to church, or when we'd go home, we would have arguments, or we would do certain things, and you'd be like, well, that's not really, that there's actually commands in the scriptures that go against that. And you start to think, wow, were we really not doing what we should have been doing? And it was a hard thing to deal with, and luckily we lived in South Carolina until I was 24, and that was the time from after I was baptized, say about 13, from the time to 24. Within 6 months, I had left the church. I wasn't attending at all once I was baptized.
Wow, 6 months.
And well, we had close friends that were the preachers, and they left the congregation there. The new preacher came in, and I was great friends with them, and they would continue to work. And when they would come to visit my dad and I.
The preacher that had left, that you had been friends with, y'all stayed in contact.
And even the new preacher, and he would bring people from the congregation that we knew. They would come to visit my dad and I.
So no one was attending. Your mom?
My mom was still attending.
Okay, but you were just not going anymore.
I was not going anymore.
And Andy wasn't either.
And Andy was leaving. He was going to basic training. So he had graduated high school and left. But they would still come and try to reach out to us, and I would, be cordial and talk to them and all that. But it was never anything that made me want to change.
Now, did you feel guilty at all?
Not really. You would be like, well, I kind of wish they weren't coming because it's an inconvenience. Because you're so wrapped up in the world, wanting to do the things of the world, you're like, this is just an inconvenience for me. And Mom told these people to come Sunday, and now they're coming Monday night, and I can't go out and be doing what I want to do.
In other words, you were so in the world and living for yourself that you just thought you're just a bother, really. Well, that's interesting for the perspective of now being faithful, then thinking of how maybe we can approach.
And that's the thing. I think of that and it's pretty simple to tell that, because I think of the signs that I shown when I was doing that. And as much as, I would sit there and talk for 2 or 3 hours once they got there. But the whole time, I was sitting there thinking, man, I can't believe they came tonight. I wish they would go ahead and go, and I could go do what I want to do.
Right.
And like I said, luckily, the 11 years between that when I turned 24, we moved from South Carolina to North Carolina. And I left my friends because I had a group of friends that were like my brother's friends when he was in high school, and once you get into that lifestyle, you're just so deep into it. And then my brother...
Evil companionship corrupts good morals, right?
And my brother had moved to North Carolina, and his family had started going back to church, and they were being faithful Christians as well. So we had that influence, plus my mom. And even my dad would attend, and he hadn't been restored, he wasn't faithful, but he was... he was working towards it, whereas I was just off, and I had no dealings with my parents for about 4 years. I would just see my mom at work, and I was just so wrapped up in that world. But when we left to come to North Carolina, I left those friends behind, and I still try to reach out to them with the gospel, and that's the thing. That's where I see these people that are like, man, I love talking to my friend Matthew, but I hate that he's sitting here talking to me right now because I want to be off doing this with my other friends or doing what I want to do, being selfish with their time and stuff. And you can get that feeling, so you want to, with my situation with that, because they were with me when I was doing these things and living in the world, I tried to just give them little snippets of it and try to do as much as I can.
Even though you yourself were not faithful, you were saying that you were still trying to drop seed and so forth.
Still trying to do.
I had to find my Bible.
Did you talk to him about setting a better example for the boys in the room? You can't lead if you don't lead by example.
Having an interview here, man.
Put a sign on the board.
But
Go ahead. We're at Preacher's Camp. I didn't know what to do there. I'm thinking, should we cut it? Let's just roll with it. We're at Preacher's Camp. We're with some young boys here in Cary, North Carolina. Nathan Adams just came in and made a joke, of course. And so, go ahead, Matthew. Keep going if you remember where you were.
But that's the thing is you have to understand with people that are so wrapped up in the world that, like I was, like my friends still are now, that you can't, when you try to monopolize their time bringing them the gospel, they're just shutting you out. They're thinking of, I want to go do what I want to do.
Right.
Whereas you need to sow some seed, you need to give them little tidbits and have them, remind them. If you give them something and say, think about this during the week.
Right.
Get in touch with them in 3 or 4 days and say, hey, have you given any thought to that? And then that reminds them and it puts it back in their mind. And hopefully you can get them to where they see the wrong that they're doing and try to at least move away. Because with me, it's not something that just happens overnight.
Right.
I was fortunate that my move was so drastic
Right.
that I had no contact with these people for 2 years at least,
Right.
because I just moved and I was gone. But when it comes to just trying to change and still having those friends, and you have to make sure that you understand, being someone that's trying to spread the gospel to them, that they may fall back into that, even if they come all the way to it.
Right.
But you need to be there to help them try to slowly, gradually get to that.
And that's what happened with you, it sounds like, with your brother.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, because he made the decision to be faithful. I mean, he didn't just give up on y'all.
No.
Obviously, there was an influence there. Your mom, of
Yeah,
course, for
and
years upon you.
I would say, and that's the biggest thing when I left to go to school last year, is that the biggest thing that I look back at now is Mom and her being faithful, and even seeing her slip into things back then that I realize now were sins, but seeing her being faithful and trying her best to go to church every time, and having her family, I look at how her sister and her brother, how they would help her, and I never noticed this before, but they would at church help her, try to build her up and let her know, if you keep doing what you're doing, your family's going to come back to the church. And it's just, I mean, I give 90% of it to her, because her example running through that, and her father was a gospel preacher before, when she was a child. I never got to meet my grandfather, but he had been a gospel preacher, and it's just her example, trying to be consistent through all those years,
right.
and really working towards it, and that shows the seed. I mean, with me, I wasn't really ready for it, but it worked my way to where you seeing that seed, and then once your heart gets to the point where you can accept it,
Right.
you just accept it, and that's when that steady working on it, and I didn't even know she was working on me
Right.
with it, but it was there.
Right. And then you finally made up your mind, and you finally had determined it's time.
Yeah,
Tell us a little bit about that. About I mean, obviously you had moved, but is there a major, because I think a lot of times when people, a lot of these interviews, people are coming out of denominationalism,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times we'll bring up the aha moment where it's like, wow, I saw this scripture and I realized I am in the wrong, I am in error, it's time to make a change. But with folks that have been brought up learning the truth, learning the oneness of the church and so forth, and pleasing God and worship, and in all regards doctrinally, and having a relationship with Him, I wouldn't imagine there being an aha moment, because the scriptures are already, at least you're familiar with what is required. And so if there wasn't an aha moment, what was it? Describe a little bit. Was it over a period of many months? Was it just a one day, all of a sudden wake up cold turkey decision? Was it kind of a slowly but surely kind of thing? Talk about that just a little bit.
Well, it was probably about 2.5 to 3 months. One of the preachers at the Durham congregation prior to your arrival, and my brother, because they were attending there, and they got together with me, and we would go out and have dinner and have talks, and I would go to church. I would worship there, but I wasn't fully
Right.
committed.
Right.
So some of the members there would come out with me and have dinner with my brother and I and the preacher, or either we'd go to like a football game or something. But prior to or after, we would get together and fellowship and talk.
Right.
And it just got to the point to where I was saying, I've made the decision not to do these things that I was doing, so why would I not take full benefit and come back to the Lord,
Right.
and get the benefits that you get with that, instead of just being the person that's just not doing it and not going to, you're basically living the Christian life without being a Christian and
Right.
getting the assurance of heaven.
Right.
So
in other words, you were like, I'm just going through the motions here. I need to make a commitment. I'm not going to just. You make
yeah,
what
why
you just said.
why
Right.
do the work
Right.
with nothing to gain from
Right.
it?
Right.
If you're
right.
going to do the work anyway, you should at least be having the assurance of heaven. And
The world sometimes phrases it this way: "Go big or go home."
Yeah.
And that's really what Jesus, in a way, says. He says, if you are not going to give everything, if you're not going to take up your cross daily and follow after me, you're not worthy of me. Don't give it half. And so it seems like he started noticing that.
Yeah.
That's some great insight. I'd like to know a little bit, if you can maybe talk a little bit, describe a little bit about gaining your own faith. And what I mean by that is transitioning from it's because mom does it, it's because Andy, your brother, does it, it's because this is what I've always been taught, to this is it. Describe, I guess, how you went to the point where you said, okay, this is what I know to be true from the Word of God, not just because someone's always told me.
Well, and that's the thing, knowing that, we try to be Christ-like, that we're trying to follow the book, that we're wanting to look at the Bible for all authority that we have.
Right.
And coming into it, I kind of knew that, so I would do study and actually have studies with my brother and the preacher at Durham at that time, and we would look at these things, and I knew most of these because I've been taught, and that's why I kind of feel like I was taught well the first time, because I knew these things. I wasn't doubting, things like baptism, immersion for the remission of sins. I knew that that's what needs to be done, and I knew where to find it in the Bible. But the question is, was my heart right when I did it? And so my faith was there, but as far as answering questions, but my question personally was I really there to do it? I mean, I knew what to do. I knew how it needed to be done. I knew these things, and it wasn't just because I had been told, but I'd seen it. I'd seen the proof.
Okay.
But the question with me was my heart right with it? And that's one thing. Even going to school, I was dealing with, and a couple of the other students there, we dealt with, where we're sitting there thinking, did we get baptized for the right reasons at that time? And it's something that happens a lot of times when you study a lot. You start to wonder.
Right.
But even with us, me and one other student both had older brothers, and we remember getting baptized right after they did. Right. And as you start to wonder, did I do these things for the right reasons? Was my heart right with it? And especially with me falling away so quickly.
Right.
You start to doubt that, and with a situation like that, there's no need to have doubts. If you need to make sure that what you've done was for the right reasons, then go ahead and do it. Have the assurance that if something happens and you're living your way, you're living in the manner Christ would have you, that you're going to have the assurance of heaven.
Right. And I mean, we've known people. I've known people who have said, I was baptized because I knew I'd be taken out for ice cream afterward.
Mm-hmm.
But they did not recognize that was the reason until 10 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back then saying, I was not thinking of what I needed to be thinking about making that decision. I was really just thinking about, it happens a lot of times at camps.
Yeah.
Folks say, oh, this friend, that friend's all getting baptized. I guess I'll just
emotion
do it
of
too.
it.
Right. And this looks, it's a very exciting time. We know that the angels in heaven rejoice. So it is something to be joyful over, but is the reason to do it just because of the emotional circumstances?
And that's the thing, you have to know, and you see this where there's so many people, and we see it throughout the church and even in denominations and even unchurched people, they're so just worried. If I mess up right before I die, am I going to go to heaven? If I mess up and, if I just fall away, if something happens, if I sin, am I going to go to heaven? And they're just so worried about that, because we hear statistics all the time at school where, so many people, they say one of the places you'll find most members of the church are on a psychiatrist sofa, because they have these problems, worried about their assurance.
Right.
And I feel like it's an issue where we don't study our Bibles enough,
right.
where we're not looking in the Word and knowing that if we've done these things, if we've appropriated this grace in the right way, and we're following and living a Christ-like life, then we're going to be assured of that heaven.
It reminds me of a test. High school, teacher might say, you're going to have a chemistry test.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, but I hear chemistry, I'm like, whoa, man, I don't want to take a chemistry test.
Yeah.
But he might even lay out, here's what you're going to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells us, this section, that section, this section, that section. Well, guess what? If I don't get there and take the time and preparation to prepare for it,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go into the test worrying, wondering, thinking, am I going to do okay? Not really being assured. But if I go in there and I knock it out and I apply that to my life and to my understanding, then I go into that test confident and assured that I'm going to do well on this thing. Jesus says, he that rejecteth me and receiveth not my words hath one that judgeth him. the word which I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day, John 12:48. So he's already told us, this is what you're going to be judged by. You live it, and your life lines up with it,
and that's what's so difficult, is how do we explain to people, and how do we get that through, that they need to, I mean, it's right there.
Right.
It says that that's what we're going to be judged by, so why would you do something
Right.
against that?
Right. And I think what it boils down to, and you